Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Ramadan special webinar. We're really excited to be having this conversation because Ramadan comes around every year, and there are always confusion and questions around what Ramadan is and how we can support those who are fasting during this month. So today we'll be hearing from our amazing panel who will be sharing what Ramadan means to them and also how we can best support those around us who do fast and how we can create a more inclusive and respectful environment during this month. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to our panelists to introduce who they are and what it means for them to be a part of this conversation.
So hi, I'm Shazia Ginai, founder of Exhale Expand Limited, which is a growth consultancy business. This conversation, what it means to me, that's a great question. I'm really excited that we get to have this chat. I think, as you said, every year we get asked so many questions, and I think there's so much information and so many resources out there. And the reason why the questions keep coming up is because hearing lived experiences is actually the best way to really understand the process that we go through and the feelings that we have during this month. And so for me, this is just a really lovely way of sharing lived experiences, and that really helps to drive more inclusive and equitable work environments.
Nice. Thank you, Shazia. Asim?
Yeah, I'm Asim Bernie. I'm the founder of Digital Age Research, which is an online fieldwork agency, and of Culture Canvas, which is a market research agency focused on diverse audiences and hard to find audiences. And I'm just glad we're having this conversation. I think these conversations are very needed. I think as a Muslim, a lot of times you you erase your identity slightly a bit. You kind of negotiate what you want to show and what you don't want to show. And I think it's just good to have a conversation in a safe space where we can have this and we can educate and enlighten people.
Nice. Thank you, Asim. And Sam?
Great. Yeah, so my name is Ibtisam. I'm a user-centered design specialist at Nexa Digital. And yeah, the reason I'm really excited about joining the conversation today is this is sort of personal passion of mine. It's like to encourage people to understand a little bit more about Muslim colleagues' experiences in the workplace. And speaking about Ramadan is one of those experiences. So yeah, that's what I'm really excited to discuss this today with you all.
Thank you. That's great. And we're really excited to have you all on the panel. Um, so to start with the first question, we hear Ramadan a lot. So for those who are unfamiliar, can you explain what Ramadan is and what a typical day of fasting looks like? Sam, would you like to explain?
Yeah, sure. So Ramadan holds particular spiritual significance to Muslims. So before I go into Ramadan, there are five, what we consider to be five pillars of Islam, and Ramadan is one of them. So Ramadan is the fourth pillar of Islam. It's also the ninth month in the Islamic calendar. And as Muslims, we believe that Ramadan is the month in which the Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And so what we also find in Ramadan is a more concerted effort for Muslims to engage with scripture in that month, whether that's through reading the Quran at home or taking part in Taraweeh prayers, which are night prayers that happen at the masjid as well after the evening prayer. So it is a month of connection, spiritual connection and revival. It's also within Ramadan itself, it's the month of the revelation, but in the last 10 days of Ramadan, Muslims also believe that Laylatul Qadr, which is the night of power, took place in one of those last 10 nights. So what you might also find is colleagues potentially wanting to take a bit more time off in those last 10 nights because we don't know which night it is. And one of those nights is the actual night in which the Quran was revealed to the Prophet by the angel Jibreel or angel Gabriel. So that's a little bit in terms of the background. For me personally, what does a typical day of Ramadan look like? Well, I'm working, so it's like there's a lot of work. There's a lot of prep. There's a whole lot of prep before Ramadan. Let me put it like there's a whole huge amount of food prep done before Ramadan. But yes, it's for me spending a lot more time with my family. So I'm fortunate that I have extended like my family. I'm based in London. My family's in London, so I get to break iftar with them. So we have iftar together, which is the breaking of the fast, and yeah, when I can, we'll do our prayers together at home. When we can, we go to the masjid and do prayers. Um, so it's also a time for me like of connecting with others. So as much as like connecting with my family, it's also connecting with friends as well. So it's like we try to sometimes have Ramadan dinners together. So yeah, it's eating sort of like in the evening, and then not everybody does this. So I'm just going to talk about my personal experience. We have short nights, so you'll find that sometimes with your colleagues because we tend to get up for suhoor, so we're not eating anything in the daytime or drinking anything in the daytime. So just before dawn, we get up for breakfast. So it means that we're getting up quite early, having
Would you
something
be
to
able to
eat.
tell us, like, for you, like,
Yeah.
what time is that? Because I
Yeah,
know, so
so
it
so
differs
I'm getting
around
up.
the
So like
world.
this morning, for example, I was up at 4 a.m. this morning with my husband. My children are also fasting, so we got up at 4 and we had breakfast. And we always have Islam Channel TV on, so that's one of the things that's always on the background. So I don't know, I think most people do. And then we pray Fajr, and then we essentially snooze for 2 hours because they go to school. And so we're up again at sort of like 7, and then they're just getting changed, getting ready for work, and then I start work just before 9. So they're full days, yeah.
Yeah, so and then so you have time to eat in the middle of the night, well, at dawn. And
Yes.
then so what time do you break it? How does that look like?
So at the moment we're breaking fast around sort of like 6 p.m. So we're quite fortunate that, well, depending on your working pattern. So for me, I'm not breaking fast while I'm working. So I finish at 5. And so I've got just about enough time to prep for breaking the fast. And we have very like yeah, similar. I'm of Moroccan heritage, so it's like what's on the table is pretty standard because in every Moroccan household you're going to have harira soup. So it's almost like the menu is predetermined with the dates and milk. So yeah, just about enough time to get ready for preparing food and then breaking fast around sort of like 6 o'clock. So we have like have a little bit of food at 6, have Maghrib prayer, and then we eat like a more significant meal a little bit later on in the evening.
Nice. Okay. And Shazia and Asim, is that does that also do your days also look like that, or does it differ in different ways?
It sounds very similar, but there are variances. Obviously, I'm from Pakistani descent, so it's slightly different. I wake up slightly earlier just because it takes me a while to kind of, get the whole engine going. I think it's so lovely when I hear about Sam with the family and all of that together, because that's something that I'm lacking. I didn't grow up in England, in London. I moved here from Belgium. So a lot of my family, my parents are back there. We've created our own family here with my wife and my daughter, but we don't have that extended Muslim network that we used to have. And that is something that I miss, where, the uncles and the aunties would come together and you have the iftar meal. I know that there's a few events going on, like Open Iftar, that is doing that now, which look amazing. But it does require you going to a certain place that is also new to you. A lot of times you're very tired, you just want to do what you do and get your glass of water, get your date, and then get everything done. So every Ramadan I have this ambition, like I'll invite some people, I recreate that, the way I used to do Ramadan back home with my parents. But honestly, within 3 days I realized I do not have the energy for this. I'll just fast, do my prayers, and go back to bed.
Yeah, really similar actually. So I'm also of Pakistani heritage, and we have a sort of very similar sort of layout of the day, waking up before sunrise, breakfast, prayers. Um, as the fasts get shorter, so the Muslim calendar is a lunar calendar, so Ramadan moves back 10 days every year. And I remember a long time ago when they were quite short, back, 20 years ago when they were again short. As they get shorter and shorter, I know some friends of mine who've adjusted their working schedules. So at that time at sunrise, they head to work. After they've had their breakfast, they just get ready and mosey on to work, and then they'll leave work around 3 o'clock, come home and have a nap before they then break iftar. So there's some variance there. Again, to Sam and to Asim's points around that family element. In the community that I'm part of, and also my family, we also tend to break fast together. And on the weekends, we have iftar at the mosque together. And different families will take turns every weekend to cook for everyone there. So all my life, we've kind of participated in that, you know, cooking for 150 people. We used to, when I lived in Kent a long while back, we used to all get together. We'd all be fasting and we'd all be cooking, you know, big pans of food for all the masses. And people who I'm sort of friends with on a personal level in the industry will have seen some of my social media posts about this every year back in the day. But yeah, so it's there's so much sort of spiritual connection. There's also just so much gratitude for all the, you know, the food, the blessings, and the family and the community that we all get to exist in, whether that be those who are nearby, or those who are further away. Just, you know, knowing that we're part of something.
Yeah, I was going to say actually, because during Ramadan, people usually have this perception that it's only just fasting and you're only just abstaining from food, but it's actually a lot more than just fasting and prayers. You know, you do take part in charity. So, like you said, Shazia, you do a lot of community work. So, and that for you looks like you go to the mosque and you feed a lot of people. Is that what you do, or how do you get involved in the charity aspect of it?
Yeah, I probably could speak to that to start, and then I'll hand over to the others. But for me personally, I think some people who are listening to this will know from my constant talking about periods all the time on social media as this period advocate. Women, when they are on their periods, or if they're pregnant or breastfeeding, or if you're unwell, you can't fast. So you can't participate in the act of fasting. However, there are other things you can do. So you can give money to charity. And if you can't fulfill the fasts, that's something that, you know, we are told we should absolutely do. I know people who give money to feed sort of the poor who can't afford to eat over the course of that month. And just also practicing kindness and generosity in general. It's a beautiful month where, you know, we're encouraged to just sort of be the best versions of ourselves that we can be, particularly when it's quite tough sometimes. You know, you have days where you feel lots of anger or you're just swearing left, right, and center. And we're kind of encouraged during this month to sort of not do that. And for me personally, because I have endometriosis, fasting for me can be quite challenging. Because there are sort of consequences to my physical health if I fast for too many days consecutively. So in that sense, I will do other things just to hold the sentiment and the feeling of Ramadan close to me.
Nice.
I'm going to build on that point, Shazia, because yesterday I was at an event and one of my colleagues, in my capacity of trustee work charity, has fibromyalgia. So she can't fast because she's taking medication. And we were talking about the spiritual connection and how it's different for everybody. So, like for some people, it is the Tarawih prayer, some of it is reading the Quran. So it's what works for you in terms of how you want to connect. But yeah, the charity aspect of it is definitely like quite a key part. Like for me, I know like personally, I mentioned Islam TV before. That's probably the one time of the year that we really have it on in the evenings, but it's around sort of like humbleness. So Ramadan is exactly what Shazi was saying. It's not just about abstaining from food is not the point of Ramadan. It's like it's abstaining, it's having that self-control to be able to abstain from food, but it's also abstaining from bad behaviors.
Sorry,
So
can I also just say
yeah,
drinking as well, because there's a lot of people
yeah,
that
it's
will
drinking.
ask,
Yeah, we
right?
don't no
Drinking and
water, even yeah, exactly. So no water, hence the very dry throat today on this webinar. Yeah, I've been on calls all morning. So it's exactly that, trying to be your better self, trying to be more grateful, more humble, thankful for everything that we have, and more compassionate to our fellow humans out there. So that's to me what the spirit of Ramadan is about.
Yeah, I think the struggles I have personally is not the food or the drinking necessarily. Within 3, 4 days, your body really gets used to it. For me, it's the swearing. You know, I can't swear. I can't get angry. Those are the things I struggle with. But it's also just, and I was mentioning this when we were having our pre-call. It's also just the way the news cycle is around Muslims, right? There is an active I feel there's an active aggression towards Muslim. You know, be it in the media, be it in political narrative, and I think that kind of always triggers you and pinches you. And because you are detaching a bit from, the worldly life, you end up being on your phone or, kind of like taking a break or stuff like that. You can't work as hard. And when you are on social media, you cannot go to the comment section, because if you go to the comment section, you will see things and hear things that will, and I think that becomes more of a challenge than anything else. So those are the kind of things that I sometimes struggle with. The charity part, I think I was reading some figures that there was a study done in 2013, and then it was done in 2022 or 24, that Muslims are 4 times as more charitable in the UK than the UK average. And I think a lot of times the positives of Muslims, that kind of gets erased, and only the negatives are then overblown. So I think that was just kind of an interesting figure that I kind of was reading. I know that my sister, for example, in Belgium, she's very involved with the charitable causes. She goes to Calais, even where there's a lot of Muslim refugees that are stuck there in the refugee camps, and she brings food for them. They also do a lot of mosque prayers for refugees, for Syrian, Iraqi refugees that came over from the last few years, that have been more welcomed in Europe than in the UK, where the narrative has been very, very negative. So those things have been kind of happening on our front in the last few years.
Yeah. I might just add one more thing then to that, Asif, because yeah, the food bit, definitely in terms of charity. Some of the charity stuff that I'm doing this year is a little bit different to what I've done in the past, but that it speaks to some of what you mentioned around the anti-Muslim sentiment that yeah, kind of like pervades us at the moment. So yeah, so this month of Ramadan, I've been spending a lot of time working on a campaign initiative about positive storytelling and narratives for British Muslims in the UK. And yeah, to me, so it's I still consider that, I hope, an act of charity, because I'm doing it sort of like voluntarily, but I'm doing it for hopefully or we do it as a charity for the great good of the Muslim community, because yeah, our sense of belonging has been a little bit knocked over the past few months.
It's just so odd to me that Islamophobia just generally is almost felt like, oh, it's reasonable to be slightly Islamophobic. And that is such an odd thing that is kind of like, seeped
Yeah.
into the narrative now. So yeah.
I mean, the media's done a number on us, really, hasn't it? Because actually it does feed into some of the misconceptions, not just about Islam, but about Ramadan in general. So I know that in the past, I've had people challenge and say, surely it's unhealthy to be fasting for that many hours. I'm sure all of you will remember a few years ago when we were in the thick of summer during Ramadan, and they were long days, fasting for 16, 17 hours in the heat with no water. And some people thought it was actually cruel and unhealthy because they had been told almost, or they've been directed into a narrative that was inherently negative and looking for the negative things rather than seeking out what could be positive during this month and for Islam in general. So yeah, it's a real shame.
There's always this idea with Islam that it's forced upon
Yes.
people, and I think that's the thing with Ramadan is that as a Muslim, you yourself are recommitting to your faith. And I think that's kind of a different narrative, like a lot of times it feels like, oh, what are you doing to your women? What are you doing to your children? What are you doing to your elderly? And I think that comes from a very completely misrepresented and misunderstood point of how we interact with our faith.
That is so true. It's a choice. It's a choice that we're making. Like, we're choosing to fast Ramadan. Like, if you're fasting Ramadan, you're choosing to make it. So me personally, I'm not, I mean, I think there is some etiquette that can be done in the workplace for Muslim colleagues around food, but I'm personally not going to get upset if somebody's eating in front of me. It's like I have made that choice not to eat, and I know that I'm capable of it. So absolutely, and it's a shame, Shazia, that it was always looked at the negative, because maybe if it was a different community, you'd say, wow, look at their stamina and the willpower and and all the other positives that you could generate. And we already know all the health benefits of fasting as well, and it's not unique to Islam.
No.
So, fasting is something that we've seen in, I think, almost all cultures, some form of fasting. So it's not novel. So it does sometimes feel strange when there is a particular spotlight put on Ramadan that isn't put upon other fasting activities. I mean, it shouldn't be put on any fasting activity, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important that you you mentioned that it is a choice, and I feel a lot of people believe that actually you don't have a choice as a Muslim and it's forced upon you and it's so cruel. Well, it's a choice, and it's more than just fasting, as you said. Like, there's so many positive aspects to Ramadan, which a lot of people don't even know about, like the charity part, people don't know about. And I think it's so important for people like yourselves to voice this. And like Asim, you mentioned the stat about charity giving. Like, that's a huge stat, right? Like 40% of UK Muslims actually give more charities. So like that, those aspects are amazing, and that's what should be spoken about. But sadly, you have to focus on all the negatives because that's the narrative.
I think
Um,
even when the Stockport riots were happening earlier last
mm,
year, when you actually go and speak with the neighbors and the people there, they know what their experience is of having a Muslim neighbor. They're the first to welcome you with food. They're the first to kind of, check for your children. And I think if you go for people that have friends or neighbors that are Muslims, they will only have positive stories.
Yeah,
But it's the spin that's surrounding it that kind of I do feel it's an active strategy that's
it
happening,
is.
but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also it's an active strategy that's not new.
Mm.
It's something that's gone on for such a long time that there's a lot of sort of subconscious conditioning and priming around this, which means that undoing it's now become a systemic problem. It's
mm,
not just something on the surface. So there are misconceptions being made before someone even opens their mouth, or, we all know about unconscious bias, and,
Yes.
everybody's gone on some sort of implicit,
mhm.
bias training. I mean, I have my own views on those, given my background and my career, for people who know it. But yeah, I think that it's a systemic problem, which is where we really struggle. And that's why this sort of thing is really important.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And that feeds really nicely into the second half of this webinar, which is to talk about the challenges that you face and experience during the workplace when you are fasting. So from your experience, how does fasting impact you in terms of work? And also if you could address the kind of the misconception that people who do fast, the productivity is so low, and it's a cause and it's a concern and it's an issue in the workplace. Would you be able to explain and talk about that a little bit?
Uh,
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to talk to the productivity piece. I can come back to some of my challenges. So it's interesting because I think it's all relative, right? We've gone through a period of time where even the 5 day in the office working week has been unturned, and we are now seeing real shifts in how we operate because we were forced into that space. And it goes to show that actually we can provide quite a lot of flexibility in the working week if we choose to. And I think when it comes to productivity, what I've found, both in leading a business, but also in working in many businesses where I've had managers who don't necessarily understand what's going on, is I think for me personally, when I have been fasting, my productivity can be impacted because obviously it's mostly the dehydration more than anything. I don't know about you guys, but it's less about the food and more about the water. However, what I do know is there are some parts of my day where I can be laser focused because some of that noise that comes from, you know, constantly thinking about eating and drinking, it suddenly goes away. And I remember when I started my career at Procter and Gamble, one of my colleagues had said to me, God, it's really funny. Now, when you book in meetings, you're not thinking about whether it's before lunch or after lunch. Like, your concept of time has completely changed, which is also fascinating. But I have times in the day where I'm really focused and other times where, frankly, I'm not. And I think that's true of everybody, whether you're fasting or not. So, what I've found is where businesses and leadership in particular need to kind of take note is just go in and understand how your employees who may be fasting are operating during that time, and then work out when you get the most productivity from them and just flex and bend a little bit to the schedule. As I said earlier, I've got a friend who will wake up at sunrise. She will have her breakfast, she'll say her prayers, and she'll go straight to work. And actually, there are some businesses I know of that are allowing that flexibility. And why don't you start at 7 and finish at 3 rather than 9 till 5? And being able to have some of that flex, I think, is a way of overcoming some of those challenges. I think for me personally, another challenge that I've faced in the past and also now that I'm self-employed is people wanting to have coffees and lunch meetings. So I just think being mindful, I think for everyone, kind of approach it with, are you fasting at the moment? If so, what would be easier in terms of when we meet? And also if you're going to do it over lunch, don't apologize too much. That's the other thing. When I used to fast in an office space back in the day, I'd have people who were eating at the same time and they would apologize on repeat. And I was like, if I'd had a problem with it, I would have said to you, can you not eat while I'm fasting? But most of the time, I'll be all right. So, it's kind of being able to engage, have the conversation, and just laugh and joke about it. We're really open to talking about these things, I think.
Definitely. It depends what they're eating, Shazia. Like for me,
Yeah.
I was office
Good
based.
point. Good point.
Whatever you like, but if you bring any confectionery in front of me, that will be cruel. Don't eat chocolate. Or
Right.
I have a sweet tooth, but
Note
I
to
absolutely
self,
agree.
for
Yeah,
Sam.
exactly. Exactly. I completely agree around inquiry. Like you need to inquire into what the needs are of your colleagues in your workplace. There's not like a template for this in terms of this is going to work for you because everyone's got individual sort of like needs. But thinking about workplaces, Shazia, I agree. I found it harder when I used to be in the office and I'm like traveling back and forth, and sometimes like traveling home, I'm having to like break my fast on the tube with a date and a bit of water on my way back home. At the moment, I'm home based, which is great. So that is making for a whole host of reasons, it's great, but especially for Ramadan, it's making Ramadan a lot easier for me in terms of me being able to like manage. So I think that's really helpful. Productivity, personally, I find it's a lot easier this year. Shazi mentioned it earlier. We've had years where we fasted the whole working day and then we've still got 3, 4 hours before we're actually going to break fast. So I haven't found so far, I haven't found this year too difficult. If anything, I'd say I'm still a little bit sleepy. So maybe my first early morning meetings aren't so great, but then after 10 o'clock, I'm okay. And then, yeah, so far, so good. But yeah, I think it's understanding what the needs are of your colleagues and having that flexibility within your organization to support them, because even within your organization everyone's going to have their own independent needs. Even as Muslims, it's not like everyone, if you've got 5 Muslims, they don't all have the same needs as well.
I think there's also just a lot of pushback, except like, for example, all of the cuts that are happening on DEI funding, that, you need to change everything because you have a Muslim in the team. And I don't think that's the case. I think even Ramadan and fasting, we're basically not allowed to change the world just because we're fasting, right? We have to adapt to the world and the schedule that there is. So I think it's more about, like you guys, Shazia and Sam mentioned, is about awareness and understanding. And I think as a company, if you either you're an understanding and flexible, aware company, or you're not. So
Mm.
it's probably, if you are, then it's probably showing in many other different ways, be it how you're dealing with people with disability, or your female colleagues, for example, or any other minority that you might have. And then it also would, bleed through in your awareness of how your Muslim colleagues are doing. If you're not that kind of company, then it's across the board that you're just unaware of any of those things happening. So I think that's maybe something that if you want to engage with your, with your Muslim colleagues, and you want to provide them a place where they feel welcome and safe and they feel that they can thrive, right? Because I do feel, just speaking of market research as an industry, I do feel that there's still a lack of kind of welcoming towards Muslim. Like, even if you look at how many visible Muslims are there in high positions in market research companies, if it's
Yeah.
not a founder that's a Muslim, or the funding is not coming from a Muslim-based company, you won't find that many.
Yeah, I think it is a big shame because our industry, especially research, is about building empathy, understanding people, and connection. So it's a shame if we can do that outwardly for clients and projects, but are not thinking about that inwardly ourselves and put a mirror to ourselves within organizations. Are we doing that empathy building internally? So as much as there is pushback with inclusion, I would hope as a research sector that the principles that you use and your project work you're using in your organization as well.
Mm. Nice. And do you feel comfortable talking about Ramadan so that you are fasting? Is it something that you feel you can speak to with your employers and your colleagues? Is it something you are open about during this month?
Not always. I am at my current place. Like, the current place has been the most welcoming environment that I've had as a Muslim, and we've had everything we've just talked about. We've had that. So we've got an ERG, so an employee resource group. And so we have these conversations part of the employee resource group. And so we talk about what our needs are and then some of the policies that support those kind of like needs. So I feel that's happened. But in the past, that's not always been the case. Like, truthfully, I've worked in agencies where, no one's really known I'm Muslim until it's come to Ramadan. Ramadan is the point that they've then understood that I'm Muslim because I'm fasting and I'm not having lunch or I'm not having, and at that point, it's like I've then expressed, shared, yeah, clearly that I'm Muslim. But it's not always been the case that there's been an interest in making any type of, and this is not an accommodation, but any interest in how to support. It's like, oh, you're doing that, that's your thing. There's been no change to the working day or the work. And I'm talking about like long hours where often in our work as well, we're doing focus groups, like focus groups in the evening. And there hasn't been that kind of consideration of, oh, okay, well, maybe we need to balance this out a little bit. So I'm saying yes now, better, but it's not always been the case.
And how about Shazia and Asim? Do you also feel that way?
So I'm a bit of a big mouth, as you know. So I unapologetically and very objectively talk about it. And I do about a lot of things, but mostly for me, it just sort of I mean, I started my career client side, and I started out in a very large company at P&G where I could talk about it quite openly. I was on a site with a lot of people. When I then switched to GHD, the hairstyling brand, which was a private equity owned business, that was very cutthroat, and I was like one of two people of color in the whole office. Like, it was really different to working at P&G. Yeah, I think it's down to the individual, and it's also really difficult. Sam and I have spoken about this before, when you have to constantly be the person advocating and championing for it. I think anyone who's operated in any sort of social purpose work in DEI knows that that can be exhausting. I think I have a bit of an advantage in that I have been heavily involved in DEI in the industry for quite a long time. So I was on the MRS's DEI Council for a number of years. I chaired Colour of Research for a couple of years. I'm on the advisory board for Women in Research. So I've had a great deal of involvement. And so I was able to speak out. I think that I personally find it really easy to talk about it. I think there are probably more people that don't. And I think that that is a fundamental issue. And I think that for those people who will be listening to this webinar, they need the support to be able to do that. And there is a collective of us, but we all exist in pockets. I think the Muslim community in market research, to Asim's point earlier, it's there, but it's not always visible. And so I think that if people felt more supported, I think everyone would probably speak out a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I run my own company, so I have the luxury to be as, unfiltered as I want to be. So, but I think also the idea Muslims are not a monolith, and there's also an evolution, a personal evolution with your own faith that goes on. The Muslim I was 10 years ago is not the Muslim I am now, right? And then there's also just different kind of levels to it. I think what Sam was mentioning about Ramadan does make you visible. And with being visible, it hurts you. It ultimately hurts you being a visible Muslim. I remember when I moved to London, one of the first because I used to work in France, I used to work in Amsterdam, and there was never that many Pakistanis or Muslims around. But when I came to London, we were having kind of a meeting, and there was a more senior Pakistani colleague, and he said, Asim, in London, if you don't drink, you're not going to get any business. And I kind of it took me aback because it was just not something that I'd ever thought of, but that was the reality these people have kind of live to be successful in this business. It's a reality that I choose not to partake in, but it does make you kind of feel sad that how far you have to go to be accepted, right? When, when trade meetings are happening in beer halls in Germany, if every after post MRS drink is happening in a pub, not like I would say a lot of Muslim men can be comfortable in that situation. I know for a lot of Muslim women that would not be comfortable in that situation. Definitely when Ramadan is happening, you can be a bit more like, okay, I could go when it's not Ramadan, but because it's Ramadan, I'm definitely not going to that event that's happening in a pub, right? What kind of meat is being served? What is the behavior also, right? Like, I mean, I've been to a lot of these events. There's a point where things go wild, and you don't feel safe anymore. So I think those are the kind of things that we need to maybe think about if people want to think about these things. We can't force anybody.
I think it's such a good point. We see it all the time, internalized colonialism and internalized misogyny, where people from minority ethnic backgrounds, or the global majority as we actually are, will bend and flex because white supremacy still reigns. And so we feel as though we have to bend and lean into there rather than opening the doors to allow people to lean into where we are. And I think that's the reason why, I think it's really important that anyone who wants to speak about their culture and their heritage and their faith feels supported in order to do that. And it's a real call out to leadership, right? Which is a problem area in this industry for sure. We know that. But there are also many leaders who we know that are perhaps unaware, but really keen to help drive the right narrative forward. So it's a call out to them really to create that space for people to feel safe.
Absolutely. And it goes to, because I agree, there's a part of what you want to share on an individual level, but organizationally, like what is the culture of your organization that is enabling someone to share, and how comfortable? Because I definitely feel, listening to Asim, I was leaning into some of this stuff earlier on in my career, like forgiving certain environments, because I thought, well, that's the only place I'm going to be able to socialize with people, and I want to get on with my colleagues. So it's like you're trying this balance. And I think as I've gotten older, I've probably become a bit more, I mean, I've always been confident, but probably has created my boundaries, decided my boundaries a bit better as well. So I think, yeah, definitely there is an onus, I will say. Yes, we can share, but there is an onus on organizations to foster an environment where somebody feels that they can share and that there's not any backlash to it. And also, once they have shared, don't overutilize them, because they've just shared something about Ramadan. It doesn't mean that they want to be oversharing about, sharing about everything else that you might have going on with your DEI activities as well. So just putting that out there as well.
Yeah, it's interesting point, Asim, about the alcohol in business. I think that's the kind of a concern from a lot of non-Muslims too. And with kind of research, when we do have events, that's always a discussion, because you're not just limiting Muslims, it's also other people that don't feel comfortable in pubs or in these environments where alcohol is served. So it's really just understanding different people's, values and beliefs and what they're comfortable in. So I think that's a really, really important aspect of it. Now moving on to, I guess, what organizations and people can do to be more mindful and inclusive. I wanted to ask, firstly, how can employers create a more safe space for conversations about Ramadan to happen without making them feel too intrusive or making assumptions? So I know some of you have mentioned that in the beginning of your career, you were uncomfortable to talk about the fact that you were fasting. How can employers change that?
Shall I can go for that. So I can talk a little bit about, I think, to be honest with you, I'll just one more point, sorry, Sia. I think sometimes I was in an organization as the only Muslim. So I honestly think they didn't know how to support me. Maybe I didn't articulate well enough to them how they could support me. So I think I'll make that as a sort of fair point. But yeah, so at the moment, in terms of what you can do, is be open. So we don't have assumptions of who is or isn't Muslim in your organization. So first of all, I don't even know, like, in your organization, do you even have any type of, I don't know, internal surveys or censuses where you're actually capturing how many Muslim employees you have within your organization? But yeah, I don't think it should be individual led. It needs to come from the top. So it needs to come from leadership to say, we know that Ramadan's coming. If anybody needs to, if anybody would like to discuss what we can do to support anyone who is fasting, and then signpost to people, to whoever it is in your organization that's going to be supporting you with that. That's what I think. It does need to be an invitation, I would say, and then it depends how big your organization. Research sector is so vast. You've got some really small agencies, and then you've got some really big, bigger ones. So I would hope in the bigger organizations, they may have employee resource groups, for example, that would support with that kind of conversation that's happening between leadership and the ERGs and supporting Muslim colleagues.
Okay. I'm sorry.
I think I would say I think we need to go a little bit more bigger picture around creating sort of cultures of curiosity in businesses, and also for leadership. So there's a top down and a bottom up effect in all of this. And I think the fact of the matter is we have an issue which, I raised at another event literally 2 weeks ago around systemic discrimination at the top. And we're putting a lot of energy and effort in the industry at the moment on how we bring more diverse talent into the sector, but that's coming in from the bottom. So things like 10,000 Black Interns program, or the Swarm apprenticeship programs, all those kinds of things. But we have a problem at the top. And I think what we need to do is address the issues around insidious problems in culture. So building more curiosity in workplace culture is one, so that the questions can be asked and people feel that they can have curious and open conversations without being reprimanded. I think the other thing goes back to this whole bit around Islamic hate. I think that we need to shift the narrative. So we need to now start talking about what the positive things are about Islam more openly. So some of those misconceptions need to be undone. But for me, it just goes a bit bigger. I think quite a lot of the things like the inclusion pledge from the MRS, I've spoken about this in the past. I think the pledge is fine. I think it's good that people are signing up. There is no accountability though. And I think that that's one of the inherent issues when it comes to DEI related topics, which this is one of them, is that there are a lot of people that will tick boxes around quotas. So if somebody did mention you need to hire more Muslim talent and understand a bit more about Ramadan, or hold an iftar during Ramadan, they'd probably do one event and they'd wash their hands of it. And I don't think that addresses the more deeper rooted cultural problems that we have. So I think it's going to be a slow process, because all these things always are, but they're bigger cultural problems and they have to be addressed from the top.
I completely agree. And sometimes, yeah, I completely agree with that, Shazia. It does have to come from the top. It has the culture, and there is a question around our sector and our industry reflecting. There's some self-reflection that needs to happen around this, like massively. But also, I was at an event last week, and what I can say is I was surprised at how many people knew very little about Ramadan. So I spoke about Ramadan. The number of people that came up to me and said, "Oh, I didn't know this and I didn't know that." So there is a huge awareness exercise. I agree. There's the bit at the top, but even some of the what you might call grassroots activities in an organization is helpful, because that's what raises sometimes the awareness. Because I actually do really genuinely think that you're right. We should be curious. This is our sector. So we should innately, of all sectors, our sector should be really good at this, yeah? Because this is what we do day in, day out in terms of being curious for our clients. But realistically, that's not always been the case, and that still isn't the case in a lot of companies. So how do we build that curiosity in the leadership team?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to admit, I've had again this year people saying to me, "Oh, I don't know lots about it. Can you tell me a bit about Ramadan?" Right? And I've seen again on LinkedIn several posts that are wonderful that were written by Muslims explaining, giving you a cheat sheet. And I have to admit, I'm going to not swear, it is Ramadan. But honestly, it beggars belief. I don't understand how we've got to a point where there's so much access to resources, so much. And everyone I speak to, they are self-diagnosing with various conditions. So they Google the earth to find out everything there is about that. Um, you don't see me walking around asking them where Santa Claus came from and what that's about,
Yeah.
because I go and find out for myself, and we're expected to lean in to
Yeah.
understanding the things that are of the cultural, what's the word I'm looking for? Of cultural importance according to British/white culture. And I just think that's the problem. I think that that's a fundamental problem, because having a conversation around what is Ramadan is absolutely fine. And as I said, because Asim raised a really great point, we're not a monolith, so there's going to be different lived experiences because it's a faith and not a culture.
Yes.
However, there are so many resources. I think that my point around curiosity comes from creating open, curious organizational cultures where people can ask questions safely, but also curiosity to go and do the research yourself. We're researchers. We tend to go, I need to do a survey to understand. There's loads of people who do desk research on this stuff. We should do that. Oh, get me off my soapbox.
No,
See?
Shazi, I completely agree. I'm just thinking for viewers on this call potentially, if you're on this call and you're listening to this, and you might not be in an organization that is sharing information right now, what advice we might have for them? Sorry, see.
Great
I have a
Yes.
very simple one. I'll have a very simple one, and I'm a bit more. I'm honestly pessimistic about the whole situation. I do not feel people want to learn. I don't know. I don't think people want to engage, and I think there's an inherent bias against Islam just
Yeah,
generally.
there is.
But if we look at the larger picture of discrimination and anything like that, go to your company website, go to the leadership board, and just give yourself a score on diversity. Easy. It couldn't be easier, right? Just do that. Just do that, see where you
Okay,
are.
that's it. And then decide whether, yeah.
Yeah, because I do that. When I pitch to a client, when I send an email, I look at the leadership board, I look at the management
Yeah.
team, and I say, they're not going to buy it from me.
Yeah, do you know what? Definitely had that conversation with myself as well. So I totally agree with you on that. I think
That's an
that's
easy tip. It's an
it's
easy
so
one.
yeah, it is easy. I think that if people are looking for ways in which they can, I mean, one of the great resources we have is Colour of Research as well, right? Like the core team, do a
Yeah.
great job at creating, like there's loads of, that team has people that can kind of signpost. But you're right, like there is, I feel you on the pessimism, because it's literally like pushing water uphill a lot of the time. But for me, they're the fundamental things. As researchers, we just need to do the research. Like
Yeah.
it just
And
feels like
we
a
as an industry
no-brainer.
need to be outwardly, right? We need to connect with different audiences. That's what makes us stronger. But it's the same thing when you're a parent in a way. You are pessimistic, but you have to be optimistic because there is no other choice, right? So I think that's the kind of thing. We have to do
Oh,
the
it's
work.
bleak.
Yeah, if I have to do 20 Ramadan presentation, I'll do them. But if that's the only choice, so we'll keep working at it, I think. But I think there needs to be from the other side, do the little steps. Like I said, go to your own website, go to your
Go to your
leadership
own
board.
website, but also do why not do some of the empathy building that you do day in and day out? Do the Faster Day Challenge. You brought up Ramadan Tent Project before. There's a whole host of stuff happening across like the country around raising awareness of Ramadan. So you have to be intentionally not like it has to be a decision that you're not interested to not know about some of this stuff right now, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right about that. I think it is a decision. I think also even words like empathy and compassion. I mean, we've got to all admit that social media gave us a heap of vocabulary around a bunch of stuff that's not really, really applied. And actually, when it comes to leadership, I have spoken to some leaders who will go out there on a podcast or, on a stage, on a panel, and they'll talk about empathetic, compassionate leadership. And then inside the building that they work in, they are treating their staff like garbage. And so I think that there's a dissonance between the language that is there that teaches us what we should be doing in leadership versus what's actually going on behind closed doors. And so I love the idea of somebody sort of fasting for a day. I've had friends who've done that, but I've never spoken to a business. I mean, I was a CEO, and I know that it's like that job is damn hard. Like it's super hard, right? But I've spoken to other CEOs who are they've got no interest in participating in stuff like this, to the point around pessimism. This has gone downhill, Sia. Now we're
Sorry.
all just like, let's give up.
Yeah.
We
This is what
we
it's
we
for.
basically need a Movember, but for Muslims, basically. Like, you know,
It's no,
everybody's
we
got,
have, look, I'll mention the name. We have Muslim Heritage Month. It's March. This is the
yeah.
intention of Muslim Heritage Month, is that March is a time of celebrating. So this is what we should be doing, the research industry, celebrating. We talked about visibility, you know, you just talked about International Women's Day. So visibility of Muslims in the sector, but across, because we talked about the seniority as well. It's like how senior are Muslims within our sector as well, because we've been in the sector for a long time. So if you don't have many Muslim seniors in the sector, again, that's a point of reflection, like that a mirror needs to be to be put up a little bit around that. But yeah, we do need a time of celebration. So as much as there's pessimism, there is work around celebrating. It's too harrowing right now. It's like, you know, we do need to celebrate ourselves and our sense of belonging here within
Okay.
within our sector, but also just more broadly within society, and all the great things that people are doing. So I hope as well that's celebrated within the sector as well, all the great work that Muslims are doing in the research sector.
Thank you. I've just seen your note, Asim. Sorry, I know this is going over, isn't it? An
But it's good
hour.
though. It's good.
Just
Like,
ranting.
Yeah, no, that's good.
I
Before we lose you, I think we spoke before we had this call. We shared anecdotes. Asim, you mentioned how in your company there's ways that you like you have a prayer room, for example. So I want to ask, what are practical measures or tips that you can give employers that they could implement in the workplace to accommodate to Muslims and also Muslims who are fasting? Before you go.
yeah, I think it's about creating space, right? It's about creating mental space and but also just physical space, right? Like if you are in Ramadan, you are praying, so a quiet corner might be nice. The example I was giving in my previous employee, they had a meeting room in glass. So the person had to go pray behind glass. So it was just like you felt like a, you know, caged animal or something like that. But there's other things also, like if people don't know about Ramadan, Muslims are also very clean people. We need to wash ourselves 5 times a day when we're doing our prayers. A lot of times that's a nuance that's not attached with Muslims, I feel, but we're actually very hygienic people. So when you are praying, you need, you know, a place to kind of wash yourself. And that can be hard when it's like a little basin where you have to like put your arms in like that and kind of fit it in. I don't know if if companies are ready to install bigger basins just for Ramadan. I mean, again, I'm pessimistic, so I'm asking for things that are not, you need to negotiate what you can negotiate. But those are the little things, just a bit of quiet space, a bit of flexibility, and just having, leaving space for Muslims. That's all we want, basically.
So yeah, one of the things that we have at Next, and we don't have a lot of Muslim colleagues. So it's like we've got our main office actually in Macclesfield, and a lot of us work hybrid. But what we've done, not just for Ramadan, but for anyone who's visiting the office as a Muslim, is there is a prayer mat. You can book one of the small rooms. So we book a small room. It's a prayer room. It's not all glass, so you do get the sort of like privacy. They've also adjusted, we've got like a disabled toilet, so we've adjusted that, so there's a douche in there, because the whole thing about ablution, doing wudu as well, is all year round. It's not just for Ramadan. There's that, and also having sometimes like some subtle conversations with people. So I don't know how other organizations, but some of our colleagues have pets that sometimes they bring into the office, and like letting people understand that, the space that you're going to pray in is not a good space for somebody's dog to walk into that space as well. So there are more nuanced conversations around how you protect the space that you're going to be praying in, as well. And then just like little practical things of blocking your time out. So yeah, so like at the moment, like what we do is if you're praying, just block your time out as that you're unavailable for meetings. So yeah, on a practical level, those things have helped. And the discussion that we always have to have every year is that Shazia mentioned it before, is our months are based on the lunar cycle, but our prayers are based on the solar. So our prayer times change all the time. So it is a piece of education. So what we've done is we've shared resources to project managers, to everyone in the company around, if you want to understand stuff, here are some of the resources. Look at the, for example, Islamic relief timetable for different, because it's different times in different like cities. Look at those resources. If you want to be an inclusive project manager, for example, think about who's in your team. If they've got any of those needs, if you've got a Muslim colleague in the team, then what are you doing to make sure that you're not creating like meeting times when they need to pray, and you're not creating meeting times when they need to break their fast as well.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think to wrap it all up, I wanted to ask you individually, what is the main takeaway that you want people to walk away from this session having learned, and also something they could apply?
I'm going to steal Shazia's term from earlier, and so from an organizational level, the curiosity aspect that Shazia was talking about, be curious and ask questions. And from a personal level as a Muslim, I just want everyone to take away from this is that Ramadan is more than just abstaining from food and drink. It's an extremely spiritual month, and Muslims engage and connect with it differently.
Okay.
I think for me, it would be, yeah, you know, curiosity for sure. I think building on that, it's do your homework. You know, I think it's really important for people within organizations who are not practicing Ramadan to go away and seek information out so that they're creating an inclusive environment for their colleagues. In addition to that, I think it's becoming more and more critical for people to be really aware of where their biases lie when it comes to anything to do with Islam. So when it comes to Ramadan, don't just think, oh, you know, they're going to be tired, or they're going to be hungry, or they won't be as productive. Think about all the positive things that this month brings and how you can learn from their lived experience and adjust how you operate as a business. And that's, yeah, my final point, which is I think we're beyond it now. Business leaders need to really think about how they are flexible in the way that they operate, because the working world is not what it once was. It's not as dictatorial as it once was. And there's a new generation of employees who kind of don't want to take that. So in order to get the best talent in as well, having that flexibility is going to be really key.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think if an employee feels welcome and safe, that's just going to add to productivity. And I think a lot of times, especially when you're kind of a mid-size company, which a lot of market research companies are, they play fast and loose with the idea that we're a family, but then we suddenly become a business too. So I think, you know, when it comes, if you do want to treat people as family, then treat them like family. And if you are a business, then keep it business. But then there's also things that you can do as a business that are, you know, follow those guidelines. So it's not either or whenever it fits you. And I think, you know, just engage and educate yourself. I mean, there's a big banner on, you know, Regent Street. You should know that it's Ramadan. You know, like what else can there be, you know?
Yeah, amazing. Well, I've really appreciated it. I feel like we've unpacked a lot, and there's been really interesting conversations around the challenges, but also insights into how colleagues and employers can really support those around them who are fasting. So I want to thank you all firstly for joining and being a part of this really important conversation whilst you are fasting, which is another big thing too. So I want to say thank you for joining, and also thank you to everyone who has listened and who has tuned in. This isn't a live webinar, but we will be taking questions. So if you want to share them with us via email or in the comment section, Asim, Shazia and Sam will be available to take those. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, Asim, Shazia and Sam, for being part of this today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Okay.